Yep.
And here we are. Welcome. It's Mark Littlewood at the Business Software Conference Hangout Zone. And today I'm pleased to welcome one of the speakers for Business Software Conference Europe later this month, Professor Jaideep Prabhu. Say hi, Jaideep.
Hi. Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be joining you on this Google Hangout.
Fantastic. I love your background there. You could fill it with anything, and you could move from Hawaiian beach to space and all sorts of things. We've got our Redgate rosettes in the background there, so we're keeping it all nice and funky. So Jaideep, great to meet you, and can't wait to hear you talk at Business Software Conference. Tell us a little bit about frugal innovation, just to kind of give us a sense of what this is about and why you think it's important, and we can.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for asking the question. I spent my career studying innovation, and the first part of my career I studied innovation in the West, in large corporations, because that was the understanding. That was where innovation was done. But then in about 2007 or so, I turned my attention to emerging markets, particularly India, where I'd grown up. And what I found was very interesting. I found that in contrast to their Western counterparts, innovators in India were different in at least three ways. First, they were very frugal. They were very good at taking cost out of the whole innovation process and doing more with less. And this could be because they faced resource constraints in their environment. And second, they were very agile and flexible. They were very good at improvising solutions. They might start with a plan, but were good at switching. And this could be because the environment is quite uncertain and volatile. And third, many of their solutions seem designed to bring people who are outside the formal economy into the formal economy. And this could be because there are large numbers of people who fall into that market segment. So my co-authors and I interviewed scores of innovators in India, the length and breadth. We looked at grassroots innovators. We looked at Indian innovators. There's a bit of echo.
Are you getting echo? Something happened. Strange. Well, it's working okay at this end, so it may just be the beauty of Google. Your microphone is off, I think, Jaideep. Your microphone is off, I think. Have you switched Jaideep off?
I've unmuted it now, but
Perfect.
I think the echo may be because someone's microphone is not unmuted.
Curious. I think the only microphones I've got are mine, and yours is on the microphone. Is it still? You're still getting an echo? It may just be the beauty of Google.
It wasn't an echo as much as it was replaying what I'd said, so it did that perfectly. Anyway,
your microphone is off, I think, Jaideep.
Is it still up?
No, I said that about a minute ago.
Yeah, see, it's playing back with a delay. That's curious. It's playing back everything we're saying with a delay.
It is, isn't it? It's like that Two Ronnies sketch. Now, so I think if you just talk now, Jaideep, you still going?
I'm here. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's not an echo as much as it's replaying everything we've said with a delay.
You just said that twice. No, I said that about a minute ago.
It's replaying everything.
Yeah. I don't know what's happened there or what we. It is, isn't it? Have you got a microphone or have you got speakers on or? I think if you just talk now, two tabs. Still going? Is he watching and joining? Do you have two tabs open? Do you have a Hangout tab open underneath? Or maybe I do. Oh God, maybe I'm.
Okay, that's probably what it was. I've closed down the other tab. Hopefully it'll work.
Okay, brilliant.
Sorry about that, everyone.
My apologies.
Apologies. Okay, so the Indian innovators seem really different, and so my co-authors and I researched this and decided to write a book. And the first book we wrote was about innovation in emerging markets and what the implications were for particularly large Western companies operating in those markets. And that book came out in 2012. And since then, we've discovered there's a great deal of interest in frugal innovation in the West for the West. And some of this is sort of parallels what's happening in emerging markets, because particularly post financial crisis, people in the West are resource constrained and trying to do more with less. But in some ways, what's happening in the West is different. Um, Particularly because it seems like people here are empowered to do more with less. So now, not only do they have access to open source software, but they can also do open source hardware, thanks to cheap computing, cheap computers like the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino.
Yeah,
Of
no,
course,
one of the other speakers actually is Jack Lang, who is from Raspberry Pi Foundation as well. And I think, what people have really overlooked with Raspberry Pi, it's great to have this cool, small computer, but actually it's an open source hardware project, essentially.
exactly. So you have frugal devices like the Raspberry Pi, which can themselves be used to make other frugal devices. And there are people who are doing tinkering in maker spaces or fab labs. So they not only have the devices and the tools, but they have access to spaces where, for a monthly subscription, they get access to these tools, they get access to 3D printers and laser cutters, and they get access to other people like them they can bounce their ideas off. And then they could come up with a prototype. If that thing has some commercial value, they could try and get crowdfunding for it. They could perhaps manufacture it in themselves or outsource the manufacturing. And then they can market this stuff using the social media and the web. So the whole process of innovation now has become is within the reach of small teams with relatively few resources, and people can now do stuff that only large companies could do a few years ago. And that's what our new book, Frugal Innovation, I think you have a copy of it there, that new book talks about. It's this
This one.
revolution, exactly, how to do more with less. And there's the maker movement, there's the sharing economy. There are people who think about resource being frugal with resources, and the circular economy. So there are all these sort of groundswell movements happening in the West. And now the question is, what do the big corporations do? Big corporations that had a certain way of innovating in the past, which is quite expensive, quite structured, long term. How can they do that as well as tap into this frugal, grassroots, agile, networked innovation?
So is it in another way almost kind of the lean start? Are you taking some of the ideas of the lean startup and putting them into big organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are parallels with lean startup. And so essentially, we're seeing companies now setting up around the world with very limited resources and very quickly. And some of them are managing to scale very dramatically. If you take a WhatsApp, literally two guys get the idea. They do something that's very similar in principle to what people in emerging markets do routinely, which is instead of creating something absolutely new, they look to see what already exists, and then they join the dots to come up with a solution. And one of the things we covered in our first book about innovation in emerging markets was something called M-Pesa, which is mobile payments that you see in Kenya, where essentially Vodafone subsidiary Safaricom took advantage of the fact that people had basic mobile phones, they were familiar with texting, they had local corner shops that could act as agents, and then basically they connected the dots and created a system whereby I could send money to you through through a text message, which you could cash in your local corner shop. And WhatsApp, I see, is a similar kind of jugaad,
That's interesting.
which is they say, okay, instead of basic mobile phones, people in the West have smartphones, and they're familiar with texting, but they also have stuff on their smartphones. They have their photos, they have their address book. Can we connect the dots to come up with a solution that's a smarter, better way to text? and to involve other people as well. And two guys do this, and in a matter of time, they have a huge number of customers, and then they are a huge company. So I think, lean startup clearly, but then what's the implication for big companies? What's the implication for a Barclays Bank, for instance, which is obviously got all the resources? They could do all this amazing fintech innovation, but then their bureaucracy, their processes, their compliance requirements, all this slows them down. So on the one hand, they're seeing this revolution going on in fintech outside the bank. On the other hand, they're constrained, even though they have all the resources in the world. So one of the things we talk about in our book, the Frugal Innovation book, is how big companies can partner with these clever startups, these fintech companies, these makers, and so forth, to be able to tap into that energy and that creativity and that speed and agility and bring that into the organization.
Very interesting. So it becomes an opportunity for both sides.
It becomes an opportunity both sides, absolutely, in the way that you saw the same kind of symbiotic relationship between biotech companies, smaller biotech companies, and big pharmaceutical companies. The big pharmaceutical companies had the resources to particularly take new molecules through the drug development process, the clinical trials process, and then commercialize them, but were having difficulty feeding that pipeline because they just weren't able to generate enough new ideas, new drugs. The biotech companies are often founded around a new molecule they discovered, but didn't have the wherewithal to really tap into the commercial potential or to take it through clinical trials even, which is an expensive and time consuming process. So you see these synergies. And Barclays is an example where they set up an accelerator in Mile End in London, and another one in Manchester, and now setting up one in New York, where they basically house, for a period of 3 months, they hothouse these fintech startups 10 at a time. And they have people from the Barclays main bank, the suits, so to speak, come in to mentor these startups. And both sides benefit because the Barclays mentors give the fintech startups an idea of compliance issues, an idea of how big banks work, what the customers are like in banking. But equally, the suits get this buzz and they really begin to see possibilities they hadn't even imagined were possible technically.
Yeah,
So
it's an interesting thing, and they're using Techstars, aren't they, to kind of
they're
power
using
that?
text.
Yeah, no, it's a very smart model. So do you think as company, I mean, as life gets easier, I mean, we've kind of, I guess, on a macro level, been through a fairly interesting 5 years. Are companies going to get more frugal or less?
Well, the pressures are on being more frugal because, and actually, in some ways, frugal doesn't quite capture it because it sounds like it's just, cutting costs. But
Yeah.
it's faster, better, cheaper. That's how I would put it. Because, it's important. A big resource is time. And you
Yeah.
really want to reduce not just financial resources, you want to also reduce time needed to achieve something.
Yeah.
And often, depending on your sector, you're also worried about natural resources. So the way I think about frugal innovation is it's a ratio between value that you're generating and capturing and the resources that you're expending. And you're trying to maximize the value while reducing the resources. And the value could be value to consumers, shareholders, or society more generally. And the resources can be financial or natural resources or simply time. And so I think the pressures are there. They've always been there. It's just that particularly large companies over the 20th century got, for various good reasons, developed a model of R&D which was expensive, it was long term, it was very structured. And while that has benefits, it's also got in the way of their ability to do things faster, better, cheaper.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to combine the two.
Brilliant. And one of the things you'll be talking about is how companies go about that.
Yeah.
Jugadification process. What are you supposed to call that?
Well, yeah, or the process of just being faster, better, cheaper in given pressures. I'll be talking about a piece of research that I did with co-authors, where we surveyed over 4,000 companies from 17 countries, to try and get to the bottom of what it was that really separated the most innovative companies, regardless of where they were in the world, from the ones that were not.
Interesting.
And because the thing about innovation that's amazing is that obviously everybody wants to do it. Everybody would like to be innovative, and many companies are at least innovative once. I mean, many of them become big on an innovation,
Yeah.
but then fail to repeat the trick. And often they fail to repeat the trick because that first innovation gets in the way. The very
Yeah.
thing that made them successful gets in the way of them being able to do it again, for all kinds of reasons. It makes them complacent, it makes them sometimes arrogant, it makes them inertial, it makes them risk averse, it makes them fearful about betting on a new
Mm.
untested thing over a sure thing. I mean, the classic example is Kodak, which
Yeah.
dominated photographic film, for created the whole business, with photographic film, that whole business model for something like 80 years. They had the first patent on digital cameras in
Mm.
the early 70s, and they failed to capitalize on that, and did that mainly because they would, if they had promoted digital photography, it would have been at the expense of the
Yeah.
established assets and model. And
Yes.
so companies have gotten savvier about this. They're acutely aware of this challenge. And then the question is, what do they do to be able to get around those problems, in order to be able to overcome the bureaucratic and other hurdles they face, and really leverage the resources they do have?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. Look, I'm really excited about seeing you. I guess one of the things I would love to know from you is, what do you want to know from a room full of smart software entrepreneurs? From, some of them are larger companies, but I mean, most of the people, I guess, at Business of Software are, I guess, people that have set up their own thing in one way or another, and it may have got very big, and upwards of 1,000 people. It may be 10, it may be 20, whatever. What can we give back to you?
Oh, lots of things. This is mainly why I'm so excited about the conference, is to hear from the participants and the delegates. So I suppose if there's really small companies, I'm interested to know what they're doing, what's their innovation,
Mm.
because these are obviously, as you've discussed, have some really interesting ideas. So it's always interesting to know what that is. If they manage to scale, I'm curious to know how they made that journey and what challenges they're facing in the next phase.
Mm.
Particularly when they have to start thinking about what's next, the next big thing, and how they
Yeah.
manage that transition. And if they're really big companies, then obviously I want to know how they are managing business as usual with business as unusual. How do they manage, focusing on their bread and butter current product, which have current customers, while at the same time being able to come up with new products, support them for new customers to take on new competitors. So really, I'm interested in the culture of companies, whether they're really small,
Mhm.
or lean startup type. How are they doing that? To the companies making the transition, how they're crossing the chasm. To the really big ones, how they're maintaining their long-term viability and scale.
If they knew that.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely brilliant.
But
Okay, well,
but if
look,
you talk to a room full of people, you might find nuggets which others
yes,
can, and this is why conferences are so great. And I suppose
exactly.
the final thing is, how is
Mm.
software meeting hardware with the
How is
Internet of Things?
software
As in,
meeting hardware? What a great question.
uh, yeah,
That's one for. I mean, what a fantastic question. I think one for another conversation as well. Because
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely,
as you know, we run the IoT Forum, which
yeah,
is a 2-day event in. I think one of the things that is really clear about hardware is that you actually have to have a lot of embedded software in it to make it
yeah,
work.
yeah,
And it's non-trivial. It's really
yeah,
non-trivial, the kind of way that you can kind of pull all of that all of that stuff together. Good news is, actually, if you look around Cambridge and where you're located, actually we've probably got some of the smartest and most experienced we've got probably one of the most experienced ecosystems at doing that in Europe. So I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about.
Very exciting.
Great. Well, look, if you haven't read this isn't to you, Jaideep. Go and do yourselves a favour. It is absolutely fantastic. Really, really very readable. And we'll see you at Business Software Europe, 24th, 25th of June. We kick off the night before with a lovely reception, which we've been planning downstairs at Redgate. And then it's 2 days of learning from each other. And Jaideep will be one of the many wise heads. 2 ears and 1 mouth, and really look forward to seeing you again in person. Great. Jaideep, let me know if there's anything I can do for you before, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take good care. Cheers. Bye.